So it's a great pleasure now to invite Dr. Swapan Dasgupta to deliver his oration on understanding Narendra Modi's India, or understanding Narendra Modi.
Well, thank you very much, Amitabh. Thank you very much, Amitabh, for inviting me to Australia, to Melbourne. There was a small window of opportunity between the last phase of polling and counting day, which I assure you doesn't really happen at the press of a button. If it did, people like me would be out of a job. It does take a few hours. There were years when it used to take 3 days, when it was quite exacting, but all the same, it's quick, but not that quick. As has been said, that in about 4 hours' time, the last of the Indian voters are going to vote, would have voted. Not quite, because there are going to be repolls tomorrow and day after in some of the constituencies where some irregularities have taken place. But by and large, I can say that the Indians have voted. Logistically, it's been a huge, huge exercise. Some 750 million people who are on the voting rolls have voted. Turnout has been spectacular by Indian standards in almost every constituency, every state. Turnout has exceeded that of 2009, that was the earlier election, by at least anything between 6 and 9%. That's been a spectacular improvement in turnout, which suggests a high level of democratic participation. And what's equally impressive, and perhaps something to note, is that between 100 and 120 million of these voters are going to be first-time voters. So there's a huge youth bulge as far as the Indian electorate is concerned. Now, amongst us journalists, we have a habit of saying this is going to be the most crucial election for India. I've heard that being said right from 1991 to now. And it's being said about this election as well. So will this election be a landmark election? A landmark election being an election where existing rules of the game are broken, where new alignments are forged and old ones recede into the background. They don't necessarily always disappear, but for the moment, they are kept in abeyance. This election is unique, but not unprecedented in one way. That this election has come to become an election which has been centered on one individual. So this election, in many ways, represents almost something like akin to a presidential election, except there is one candidate and a lot of people who are voting either for the candidate or against the candidate. So there are no two candidates really in the race. So that's what makes it a little, I'll elaborate on this point as I go along, but that's what makes it a very, very interesting and unique election. It's also unique in another way. Very rarely has the candidate traveled so much and kept up such a punishing schedule. Between the 15th of September till day before yesterday, Narendra Modi had addressed 450 odd public rallies in India. Now, when you look at a public rally, it involves a speech anything between 30 and 50 minutes. So you can understand the punishing schedule that's involved. When in 2009, a lot of us at that time, the members of the commentariat, had concluded that public meetings in India were on their way out. That we are actually getting into a stage where audiences for public rallies were shrinking, and if someone got an audience of 3,000 or 5,000, they should be very satisfied, and if they got 10,000, they should be hugely appreciative of that trend. Modi's average rallies are anything between 80 and 150,000. These are the election rallies. I'm not talking about the pre-election rallies, which happened between September and January, where the crowds were actually 300,000, 400,000 and above. So he's returned the public meeting, the mass public meeting, into the center stage. So as a form of electioneering, this, to my mind, constitutes a reversal of an earlier trend. What is also very interesting about this election is the massive use which has been made of other innovative techniques, two of which I can single out. The first one being what was called the chai pe charcha, in other words, a tea party, not to be confused with the American variant of that expression. A tea party, in other words, is really what people gather around over a cup of tea and discuss politics, except it wasn't just a few individuals, it would be about 200, 250 odd individuals discussing tea. And the other one, which was interesting, was what is called the 3D program, which is really hologrammed images of the candidate. He would be broadcasting live from somewhere else, and simultaneously at about 150 different lesser known or more remote locations through satellite that would be linked up. Now Modi thinks that's been a great success. I think I would still reserve judgment. I think the hologram attempt has been a novelty and it's an invoked curiosity, but I'm not sure how much of voter penetration it's actually managed. But if you go to a Modi rally, and I've been now for various ones, there's one thing which will strike you, that they are less of a conventional political rally and more akin to rock concerts. There is a huge frenzy. It's not so much what the candidate says, as much as the fact that he is saying it. It's that, and really, it's the huge chant of Modi, 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 which greets it. Now the skeptics say, oh well, didn't we see it in Nuremberg in 1937? But I'll leave that historical analogy for another day. Secondly, what is equally important is every election, one slogan catches the imagination. That becomes, when you hear kids, who are obviously not going to be voters, but kids in the neighborhood start chanting it, then you know that somewhere along the line, that particular slogan has hit home. And in this election, what I found was that there was a jingle from an advertisement which was widely telecast. The operative line is, if for the people who can understand Hindi, Modi ji ko lana hai, acha din aane wala hai, which means we are about to bring Modi. The good days are beckoning. It's really the good days are beckoning, which was really the catchy slogan of this election. And that has a lot of implications. It has awesome implications in terms of the appeal, it has a very serious implication in terms of what might happen in the event that Modi wins on the 16th. Now, for most pundits, they began this election with the presumption that it will be a close contest. Everyone was agreed on one point, that the Congress was not going to come back to power. That the Congress, which had ruled for the past 10 years in a coalition government, was not going to come back to power. That seemed to be a virtual unanimity on that count. What there was a measure of disagreement was whether Mr. Modi would win by how much, would he be able to form a stable government, or would he be heading a fragile coalition, or a third lot of people who suggested that we would have a terribly hung and fractured parliament which would make a dog's breakfast of governance for the next 5 years, or if it lasted 5 years. In fact, even to this date, Mr. Kejriwal, who is the third, how should I call it, the Aam Aadmi Party, which is it's ordinary, translated would mean ordinary people's party, something akin to a protest movement, something akin to the early Greens in Germany. It's a combination of all these, but a lot of energy. He's speculating, he's talking about another election within a year. Now, by about the second phase of the elections, and the second phase of, or was it the third phase? Third phase of election was around April the 10th. So you can see how long this process has been going on. The buzz was created. And Delhi, if you know, as a city, is a vast echo chamber. Once the Bush telegraph signals something, it gets picked up and transmitted and retransmitted and amplified in its own way. By about the third phase of the election, the question was, Modi is winning, how much will he win by? Is there a Modi wave? So the terms of discourse changed completely. And from there on, it was not a question of what you fight the incumbent government, but the merits or demerits of Narendra Modi, which became the central focus of the campaign, both from his side as well as from the opposition side. The Congress, which began its election flaunting its achievements over the past 10 years, switched tack, and it became not so much what they had done, but what Modi cannot do, or why Modi signals a danger to India. So it's important to notice these shifts in this election. So when I'm going to talk about this whole process of a possible Modi India, and see it as reflected through certain elements, facets of this very interesting and a very rumbustious election campaign which we've just witnessed in India. Now the question arises, if Modi has struck a chord with the electorate, what are the reasons for it? Rather than dwell into what some people suggest are the election, let me give you my things. And these are based purely in terms of opinion polls. The ones which I trust most are the one, it's a more academic opinion poll, which is done by the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, CSDS, and their associated wing, Lokniti, which they do. And all of them, all their polls, and they've been doing a series of tracker polls, which I've been loosely involved with, they suggest that the most important issue which agitated the electorate at that time was the question, what in India we call price rise, which others call inflation, which some others call livelihood questions. Particularly over the past 15 months, food inflation in India has soared, has gone beyond control. That has been on the top of the mind of most people. The second issue, which is equally important, was the issue of corruption. Now, corruption is nothing very new in India. Corruption has always existed in various forms. Where the present levels of corruption are different and are perceived to be different by the electorate is that India has become relatively more prosperous over the past 2 decades. Therefore, the sums involved have far many more zeros than were thought possible. So it's the quantum of corruption, not the fact of corruption per se. And there have been 2 or 3 very highly publicized issues like the telecom, the granting of telecom licenses for the 2G, it's prehistory now, coal block allocations, etc. The polls suggest that in July 2013, that's about a year ago, 66% of India thought that the UPA was either very corrupt or somewhat corrupt. But by March 2014, that is just before the elections, the voting process started, that figure had risen to 73%. So with a perception level that 73% of people believe that this government, the existing government, is tainted by corruption, made its re-election almost a virtual impossibility. Because they had been, in terms of simple morality, they had violated a code of ethics. The third issue, which probably can explain why Modi has struck a chord, is the issue of leadership. Now, for the past 10 years, India has been governed by a very strange system of diarchy, where the political authority and the executive authority have been separated. The political authority rests with the president of the Congress party, Sonia Gandhi, while the prime minister is a person who actually does not wield any significant political influence. Now, this worked famously for 5 years, not least because the economy was doing well. But once India's economy registered what in bureaucratic jargon they call a slowdown, but I think is a little more serious than that. In other words, from about a 9% growth per annum, we slipped to below 5%. The question of leadership became paramount. And this was symbolized by the incoherence of the cabinet, of people acting in different diametrically opposite, in very different directions. The Environment Ministry was a law unto itself. India's most publicized foreign direct investment, the POSCO project, a Korean collaboration in Orissa, was held up partly because one wing of the government was doing one thing, another wing of the government was doing another thing. Then there was this case of Manmohan Singh acting completely, being absolutely perceived to be completely helpless in the face of ministers who were basically, to put it more crudely, looting the treasury. It's not that any accusing finger was pointed at Dr. Manmohan Singh. His reputation, his for integrity, for intellectual honesty remains by and large intact. He's seen as a good man, but a good man who is completely ineffective under the circumstances. A good man who cannot even control his own cabinet. So the leadership issue became very important. Against this was posited a leader who takes firm decisions, who believes in single window clearances, who can ride roughshod over bureaucratic hurdles, who is decisive, if somewhat macho. But these were the attributes. In another age, these attributes may not have worked. But whenever something clicks, there's a context. And that context was provided by the ineffectiveness of Dr. Singh to perform at that critical juncture. So leadership became a very, very important thing. So the ground for what has become a virtual presidential election was actually set not by Mr. Modi, but by his opponents. So Mr. Modi appeared to be the way out of this impasse. The next issue, I think, was to do with, and it's linked to this, was, for a change, question marks began to be raised on the political efficacy of the Gandhi family. Now, the Gandhi family is probably India's best pre-sold political brand. Everybody knows about them. They have views on them, favorable, unfavorable. Someone or the other of that family has governed India either directly or indirectly over the past at least 45, nearly 50 years out of the 66 years. So it's always been somewhere up there. It has somewhat of an iconic status, and it is seen to be the defining point of Indian politics. Now, the transition from Sonia Gandhi to Rahul Gandhi, her son, 42 years old, slightly impetuous, but well-meaning from all accounts, etc., didn't happen very smoothly. In fact, it was fraught with mishaps all along the way. The main point about it is that Rahul Gandhi had a vision of politics which was very different. He believed in transforming the system. And he tried to project himself as a rebel within the system, and therefore detach himself from the liabilities of the existing government. A difficult exercise under any circumstances, but it was made doubly difficult by his own behavior. So, by saying that, no, this is a Manmohan Singh government, and in future we'll get a more energetic Rahul Gandhi government, this detachment which he sought, therefore not inherit the anti-incumbency which might flow to him, that exercise faltered. And it faltered terribly after a disastrous interview which he gave in January. And to my mind, that from being a person who was regarded as a well-meaning person, he became an object of mockery. Now, a politician, as you know, can be loved, can be hated, but if they are mocked, that's about the worst thing that can ever happen to any politician. And that's precisely what happened to him. Now, if you look at Rahul's poll ratings, and these are unprompted questions when you ask people without any prompting, who do you want as the next Prime Minister of India? His poll ratings as PM choice fell from 19% in July 2011, now that's quite a long way away, to 15% now. So, over 5 years, over 4 years, his ratings have been steadily coming down. Now, that's probably the lowest political rating any member of the Gandhi family has ever had. And this was not realized sufficiently by the Congress party, which started its election messaging with the idea that Rahul would be the prime ministerial alternative to Narendra Modi. But they changed course. First, they started projecting Rahul Gandhi in very tastefully crafted advertisements all over the country. Perhaps they started a bit too early, which was a subtle message saying he's a leader of a team, he's a leader of a team, contrasting against Modi, who they said was a one-man show. They use cricket analogies, they use various other things. So this didn't, coming in the wake of the government-sponsored advertisement showing the extent, the sheer magnitude of change which had happened in India over the past 10 years. This was supposed to be the cutting edge. From there, you would get another person who would be able to lead it. But they never persisted with that. And after January, it was dropped altogether. So the projection of Rahul Gandhi stopped. And anybody who's familiar with election strategizing would realize that the worst thing that can ever happen is if you change course midway. It's just not done. Because you confuse voters, you confuse your loyal workers, you confuse everybody. And so I would say in terms of pure campaigning style, this time the Congress has not done a very creditable job. Congress in the past has mounted very, very effective campaigns. But this, 2014, was certainly not one of these occasions. Now let's get to the question of Narendra Modi. Modi, as everyone will tell you, either evokes fanatical love or visceral hate. There's very little midway course as far as Modi is concerned. Those who are familiar with him know that he's a man with likes, dislikes, etc. He was a man who was for 12 years the chief minister of a province. His elevation to the national stage didn't happen as a result of a committee decision. India doesn't have primaries because, that would make life easier. But India doesn't have primaries, so it's really those people, the counterparts of the people in dark grey suits and smoke-filled rooms which sort of do the job. And here, if that had been the case, Modi may not have been the candidate from the BJP. But it was made clear, the pressure from below of the ordinary foot soldiers of the BJP, the message coming from the ground was so unequivocal and categorical that the people in the committees could not ignore that message. And the message was, either you appoint Modi as the leader of the BJP for the campaign, anoint him your prime ministerial candidate, or we are not working for you. And the message was so loud and clear that they wilted. And I think it will tell you very much the manner in which Modi's elevation from Gujarat to the national stage happened will tell you a lot about the style of politics which Modi. Now, where is this energy coming from? All the opinion polls are unanimous on one count, that Modi's main support base, and this is borne out by anecdotal evidence as well, comes from the electorate which is between 18 and 35 years old. Particularly strong in first-time voters and particularly strong among the 18 to 25-year-olds. He leads the pack comfortably in this segmented group. In fact, the higher the age, the lesser the support. So, India, if there is a demographic dividend which India has in terms of its youth bulge, much of that support has moved with Modi. And he has been systematically targeting this constituency. In fact, once he mentioned to me about the use of social media, which most politicians still regard with a great deal of skepticism, but which he has been using very effectively for the past 5 years. And he once mentioned to me, I think I should make it a rule that anybody who has less than 50,000 followers cannot stand for election, at least our candidate. Now, obviously, it's not going to happen, but I think it just suggests the importance he was attaching to that. Now, let's look at what the figures are between in the 18 to 22 years age group. Modi, 18 to 22 years olds. Modi 39%, Rahul Gandhi 17%. And the rest are all other regional leaders, etc. 23 to 25-year-olds, Modi 38, Rahul 17. 26 to 35, Modi 37, Rahul Gandhi 15. So you can detect the consistent pattern in this. So the energy of this campaign for Modi, which has drawn both favorable and adverse comments, is contributed by this. Last week I was at a rally Modi rally in Amethi, which is often referred to as the pocket borough of the Gandhis. It's where Rahul Gandhi contests from. I mean, I didn't believe that BJP ever stood a chance. I mean, I'm still a little skeptical about the claims that they're going to give it it's going to be a close run. But what was interesting about that 70,000 strong rally in a principally rural dominated, it's a rural seat, was that it was about 50% of youth. And youth means boisterous. It's that rock concert phenomena all over. It's a rock concert, T20 cricket match. You use any analogy you want to, but it's that. Now, there was another factor which added to Modi's appeal. A very good friend of mine who is in the Congress party, with whom we often do a sort of a Punch and Judy show on television, my friend Manishankar Iyer, a man, a Gandhi family loyalist, very articulate man, extremely clever, has a way with words. At the Congress session in January, he was asked some innocuous question, and he says, well, we're going to come again, we're going to rule again for the next 5 years. Someone asked him the question, and what about Mr. Modi? He said, Mr. Modi can take a job selling tea at the AICC session. Now that was a jibe, because Modi's origins, he began life as a tea seller on a railway platform in Gujarat. Now that gave him that opening to contrast his humble origins with the sense of entitlement of the other family. Kept on harping on the fact that India cannot be run by people who were born with a silver spoon in their mouth. Every attack on him was saying, of course they will not countenance any criticism, because who am I? I'm just a lowly tea seller. He put that tea seller, completely turned that argument on its head to his advantage, and drove home the point relentlessly, to the extent of calling Rahul Gandhi the princeling, which again evoked a lot of responses, etc. Now, so in terms, the BJP has traditionally been seen as a party of the upper caste Hindus. It's a bit of a caricature, because no one who's you cannot win an election by being a upper caste Hindu party. Nor can you win an election on the strength of being just purely a middle class urban party in India. But if you look at the opinion poll data again here now, in terms of the intention of Modi's support, upper caste, 50% for Modi, 11% for Rahul Gandhi. The backward castes, which are the most important elections. I mean, to explain backward castes would mean involving a good thing. But people who are not necessarily poor. They may be poor, but it's a sort of a ritual categorization which gives them a certain status in the affirmative action scheme. Modi 39%, Rahul 11%. Scheduled castes, that's in the caste hierarchy, who are those who are supposed to be at the lower rungs. Modi 25, Rahul Gandhi 15. The scheduled tribes, Modi 32, Rahul Gandhi 17. The only two sections of the population where Rahul Gandhi enjoys a clear lead over Narendra Modi is amongst Muslims, where Rahul has 32, Modi has 10. I feel even 10 is too much, probably it's far lower than that. Christians, 31 for Rahul Gandhi, 14 for Modi. So it's quite clear on one side. Now, at the risk of oversimplification, I would say that the bulk of India's Hindu population has turned out to vote for Modi, has endorsed Modi quite clearly, or appears to be endorsing. I mean, opinion polls can all go wrong, and I might be looking a fool in 2 days' time. Now, does that mean that, and this is a point which has been said, that are India's minorities in any danger? I would put it in a different way. This was an election which was fought on the strength of principally development, a dream for the future, and an attack on the earlier government, on the performance of the earlier. It's not that it was fought on pre-existing fault lines in society. And it's silly for me to deny that there exists a certain degree of Hindu-Muslim schisms which have a long historical basis. It's just that there were two very, very different perceptions of what this election meant to various people. It didn't lead to any communal friction, it didn't lead to any sectarian riots, etc. In fact, compared to the past, the amount of really inflammatory speeches were very little in this riot. I mean, there may be the odd one here and there. No election in India is spared from people who just go a bit over the top. But by and large, it was two very, very different perceptions, different ways of looking at this thing. And this has some significance in the future. There is the element which is called the Gujarat model. It became a sort of a general mantra. It's one of those meaningless terms. But what really mattered was that a belief that the success Modi had in terms of making Gujarat a sustained double-digit growth state for the past decade would be replicated all over the country. And this, in turn, has led to unreal expectations. There'll be 24/7 electricity, there'll be roads will be thing, everyone will have a job, and it'll be utopia, it'll be Shangri-La all over again somewhere in India. It's the expectation of an economic miracle, of a magician, which is driving this thing. Now, how far are these correct? What can we seriously expect in terms of if Modi is to win? Firstly, we have to look out for one thing. If he wins, what is the extent of his majority? If it's a fragile, wafer-thin majority, the elbow room available to a prime minister is very, very little. Then, at best, Modi can be an effective crisis manager. If he has a more comfortable working majority, doesn't have to look over his shoulder at every point, then we can think of other more profound changes in society. And what are these? Assuming he has the elbow room. Now, this is an assumption. Assuming he has that elbow room, what are we looking at? I think the most important change which a Modi government could bring in the wake of the type of election campaign we've witnessed, and this is important to realize that it's got to be linked to the type of election campaign, is that he would have restored a faith of India in itself to improve itself. I think what was lacking for a long time, whether in business, whether in other spheres, was the belief that once again you're sliding back to the bad old days. That ultimately nothing, we'll always miss the bus, that we are destined somehow to lose the plot just as we are getting it. So this harnessing of energies, particularly youth energies, is, to my mind, very important, because this in turn is going to lead to a business confidence. The past 3 days has seen the Bombay Stock Exchange go a little berserk on the expectation of a famous Modi victory. This is not necessarily because Modi, without winning, can actually restore all the fundamentals of the Indian economy, but it's a belief that at least India will be governed at the right sort of spirit, and that a pro-development approach will now take center stage. This implicitly is also a rejection of the type of welfarist-led scheme which the Congress had actually tried to pursue, believed at one time would be the electoral game changer, but never really managed to sell very effectively. It's a debate which I think is familiar, not least to Australians here. I think they've heard facets of this debate in their electoral confrontations. So that's a debate which is also playing out in India in some way. I think the other point about Modi is that Modi as a person is a bit of a mystery to a lot of people. He's a mystery for different reasons. A, because he's a very private individual. So everybody knows the public Modi. Everybody knows the Modi the orator, Modi a bit of the demagogue, Modi the man who inaugurates these glitzy functions in Gujarat, who holds these mega summits for investors, who gets certificates from investors, etc., who manages to have roads done in record time, who managed to clean up the Sabarmati, the man who actually ensured water supply in Kutch. There's a sort of reputation, but what is the Modi all about? What is this Modi? And that's why the idea which was used by his detractors quite a lot was, Gujarat isn't India. Now, of course, Gujarat isn't India. I mean, that's stating the obvious. Point which was stated is, how can a man who governed effectively in Gujarat necessarily be able to translate his achievements into the rest of India? Actually, there's no guarantee. There's absolutely no guarantee. Modi may or may not. But what is important is that you understand what the thrust of Modi is going to be. Thrust is, which he's stated time and time again in even public advertisements, is that to make government more focused. He keeps on uttering the word minimum government, maximum governance. So cut down the state, cut down the babudam, leave a lot more for individual entrepreneurship to flourish, and wait for it to take effect in India. Of course, this has been used by a lot of his detractors to suggest that Modi is a champion of crony capitalism, that he would really favor the big business, he would favor this. Now, there's no evidence to suggest that Modi is actually in favor of big business. He's pro-business rather than pro-big business. In fact, the basic social base of the BJP and Modi are actually the SMEs. It's the smaller entrepreneurs who are actually driving him. Also to be remembered, another thing is, for those who make that contention, that he is basically an insular Indian xenophobe. He may be. But in terms of his economic policies, if there is one person who looks globally, it's him. His basic inclination, and that's got a lot to do with Gujarat. Gujarat is a state whose only comfort level is that it's got a huge sea body, it's got a huge coastline. In terms of actual mineral wealth, other things which you can, extractive resources, it's got precious little compared to the rest of the country. And it's always flourished through trade, traditionally. And trade, not internal trade alone, it's global trade, whether it's in Africa, whether it's Australia. I mean, Gujaratis are all over, this huge diaspora which is there. So Modi reflects that urge of globalizing India as much as possible. This, I fear, could land him in a bit of trouble with his own party, some of whom have protectionist instincts. That's the point to watch out for. The question of foreign policy has often been asked. What sort of foreign policy is this man? Now, foreign policy is an issue which you know in internal politics during an election campaign is never discussed. And India is hardly an aberration in this respect. At best, you can have a few words about Pakistan, etc., but nothing beyond that. I think that if you were to define what will be the main thrust of Modi's foreign policy if he wins on 16th, is it'll be far more oriented towards making Indian missions like trade missions. They will become more like business missions. Now that might be of some discomfort to the existing members of the Foreign Service, or may not. But I think that's the fundamental change he would want. That India must use, first, India must build its own capacity. Number two, India must leverage its economic clout for larger diplomatic and strategic objectives. Now that's perhaps good news for people in Australia, not least because he's very fond of Australia, having always, he went to some sheep farm which he constantly talks about. And it's good for Australia in terms of, because Australia has a presence in India. At one time, Australia didn't exist on the Indian radar except when the cricket teams arrived. Now it's different. Australia is important. It's recognized as important. It's seen as a friend. It is seen to also, along with countries like Japan, Singapore, and Korea, of being a country with which India shares certain very loosely defined strategic objectives. So many of these strategic objectives have been left willfully unstated for obvious reasons, but I think there is a assumed understanding of what each other means. And finally, I would say the most important change which a Modi government could bring about, and that's if he has that elbow room, is to gradually tilt the center of gravity of Indian power from the center to the states. This actually has a very profound implication. Needn't go into all the details, but the point is India is over-centralized. The states complain about it incessantly. That schemes, there is a one-size-fits-all assumption, particularly in the past 5 years, which has been there. And that the states not only want a fair share of the central revenues, but they also want the right to design their own schemes, the right to design it. They don't want to be told, okay, here's a scheme, now implement it. Now, that change has enormous implications. And I believe that if he unveils the scheme, and I think he might in case, to get the largest number of even people who are politically opposed to him supporting him in a different way as far as the governance is concerned. These are some of the things. And I'd say finally, I know it's sort of pressing for time, this has been an interesting election. This is an election which, if the results turn out to be the way we think, there are basically two imponderables here. Number one, the most important, what does this 5, 6 to 9% surge in turnout mean? It's a huge, huge figure. It can upset every calculation. Opinion pollsters will not be able to, exit pollsters may not be able to get it, because it has very serious implications. It can either mean that everybody has ganged up against Modi and have voted tactically to defeat the BJP, or it could mean that there's been a bandwagon effect, that you've detected the front runner and everyone's very keen to get onto that chariot. If that happens, I think we could see very, very surprising results. And the second important result, which I think would flow from this, is that I've noticed in this election, the importance of caste as a focal point of political mobilization has come down dramatically. There's been a lot of cross-caste voting. Some of the figures which I suggested to you has been. This may not last, this may not endure, and we possibly regress, or we could be seeing the beginning of a new trend in Indian politics. We should be modest and tentative about our conclusion, except that notice that this has happened. Whether it will endure or not, it's too early to say. But I think what would also be is that if the election results turn out the way I think it's panning out, it would constitute the most ignominious defeat and setback to most of the old India hands and the entire world of punditry, which wrote off Narendra Modi even 4 years ago, saying he won't win a seat outside Gujarat. Because the assumptions, the mold in which they saw the politics of India shaping out didn't operate. Modi broke all the rules of the game in terms of political mobilization. He took an audacious conceptual gamble and banked on things which people had noticed, but it never acted upon politically. So if that happens, I fear the old India hands might have to reassess their knowledge and assessment of India. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Swapan, for that really insightful and very comprehensive picture of what India could be under Prime Minister Modi. Let me ask you a question, which is, of course, a question lots of people are asking. As Prime Minister of India, he's going to have to be different than Chief Minister of Gujarat or as the leader of the BJP. And he has to willy-nilly reassure the Muslims. 10% of the population, 150 million or so. What can and what should he do as a way of reassuring the minority?
Yeah. I think Amitabh is absolutely right. You can win an election without the support of 13% of the population. But you cannot govern India with a sullen and hostile 13%. Now, I'm not sure whether the Muslim population is necessarily going to be hostile. But yes, there are large elements there which see the advent of Modi as the complete end of civilization as we know it. So there has to be certain gestures, there has to be a certain points of reassurance as to say that, look, number one, Indian citizenship is equal. This is the point he's been making. But that's been interpreted as a sort of dog's whistle. It means we want you to be uniform. Your religious identity is obliterated. It's been, in my view, it's wrongly been interpreted, but in a situation where the baggage of the 2002 riots is still very much there, it has a receptive audience. I think symbolic gestures may not work. What is very important as far as Modi is concerned is that his administration has to be doubly, if not trebly, alert to the fact that the security and safety of the Muslim population is not endangered in any way. And I think this is important because immediately after if there is a election victory, and it will be accompanied by very boisterous celebrations, as happens, there are people who tend to overdo things a little bit. That has to be a factor. But more important, over a sustained long-term basis, if you can assure people their security, then I think you will cut down the hostility. You might not win their votes, but I don't think that's very important. But what's very important is to show that, look, you two are partners in this larger development scheme. Now, after that, if you choose to not support, it's your right. A lot of communities don't support. I mean, in Britain, the Conservatives have traditionally done rather badly amongst the ethnic minorities. So it's not something unique, but I think it's the feeling of not being left out, not being discriminated. Nothing, I mean, he has to demonstrate in action that equality for Indians means equality for Indians. That's really what it is.
Floor is open for questions. Yes, please, Rohini.
Thanks, Swapan, for that very interesting talk. The question I had for you was on the issue of women empowerment and Modi's role and how he's really put the spotlight on this issue. And I'll give you a few examples, and I'd love to hear your views on how this would play out. He's talked about the abolishment of stamp duty for women ownership, for properties owned by women, which has resulted, I think that's translated into crores in tax losses for the Gujarat government, but it's also resulted in a hike in property ownership by women. He's also talked about special grants to villages who elect women-only, leadership teams in their, probably the panchayats. He's also talked about small changes like school admission forms that require the name of the mother before the father's name, when you're registering your child in school. And also special business grants for women entrepreneurs. Small and simple measures, but all sending a very, very powerful message, I think, to women in general. And he's looking to harness that female energy that he talks about as well. I'm curious to hear how you think that will translate and what the ongoing effects of these policies could be.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Gujarat and the stamp duty issue, which is not known by too many people. And it really happened after the earthquake, when the rebuilding process was initiated, after the big earthquake of 2001, when they were reconstructing the houses, and they said stamp duty waiver, there'll be a stamp duty waiver in case the property is registered as a woman is a part of that ownership process. I think it was halved and then full exemption in the case of women. Now, there is often a tendency in India to look upon Modi as being part of the usual Hindu patriarchal system. And this is partly because of the disproportionate sway or intellectual clout of his liberal opponents. They often look upon it in that Modi believes in these old-fashioned women should be at home. It's not the case at all. In Gujarat, he's actually created within the BJP a very, very strong women's leadership cadre. There is no significant opposition to his doing all these things. The point is, it's got to be done. And it is a priority. And I mean, you've spelled it out. There's very little I can add to that.
In fact, he's also mentioned that the reservation for women will be almost 50-50 in the state legislative assemblies. So
that's a difficult one when you haven't yet managed to get 33.
Yeah. Did you want to ask? Someone here was. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
No. I'd asked the lady there, and then the gentleman there, and then you.
My question is about the relationship between the middle classes and the BJP if Modi comes into power. Much of the literature on middle class politics in India describes it as an anti-politics and talks about middle class use of civil society rather than electoral politics to get what they want. Do you think that relationship between the middle classes and democratic politics is likely to change with the Modi government?
Well, I would first contest the assumption that all the middle classes are anti-politics. There is certainly in the urban metros and in the metropolitan cities a very large section of the middle classes who are well off, who have turned anti-politics. But that would certainly not be the case. When you talk about the middle class, you're talking about a huge range of people. You're talking about not only the people who have six-figure incomes, but you're also talking about people who have just about bought one two-wheeler for the first time, because they also have middle-class ambitions, aspirations. Modi uses a term called neo-middle class, which and he used this very successfully in his election appeals, which is really people who may not have actually entered the middle class, but who aspire to enter the middle classes, who are knocking at the doors of middle classes in terms of wanting certain education, particularly for their children. The education is a big thing for the next generation. So he's appealing to that, and in this election, I certainly didn't get a sense that the middle classes have become anti-politics or are exploring alternative politics. Yes, there are people who are doing that. Certainly, a lot of the people who are within the influence of the NGOs are exploring that possibility. But if you go to the more forbidding towns of Bihar, UP, Andhra Pradesh, etc., that's where the aspirations are most visible. I don't think that anti-politics, they still feel that change is going to come about through politics. Now, maybe if there is a spate of repeated disappointments, there would be a drift to the anti-politics as at one time was represented by the Aam Aadmi Party. Of course, the Aam Aadmi Party has now embraced politics as an instrument of change. So I think the signals are very mixed. But I would certainly say it would be hazardous to suggest that the middle class as a whole has turned its back on the political arena.
Yes, gentleman there. Yeah.
Thank you, Swapan, for that very enlightening talk. You've actually very succinctly summed up the state India is in presently. Now, we're going by the buzz in India. It's almost a foregone conclusion that Modi is going to come to power. And it augurs very well for India because he's a very decisive leader. He's got vision, as they said. Kejriwal was rising up because of television, Modi because of vision, and Rahul was something else. Now
it's very uncharitable.
Now we saw there was this phase where there was this growing disenchantment of the middle class. They were avoiding politics with a barge pole, right? But then we saw the rise of Arvind Kejriwal, Aam Aadmi Party, and hordes of people, public figures in other various in all walks of life, hopped on.
You'll have to come to the question. We're running out of time. So, is there a question there? Or
yeah, no. See, BJP is a a cadre-based disciplined party, will it accommodate the aspirations of all these people who want to be a party to nation building?
Yeah, well, I mean, some of this has been answered in my previous question about, this anti-politics business. But, the importance, yes, there is a disproportionate importance of the middle classes to the BJP. Each political party has its own dynamics. For the Congress party, if it loses the support of the very poorest, particularly the scheduled castes, tribes, tribes has gone out of their orbit for some time, scheduled castes and Muslims, they are in trouble because for them, their strength right at the margins of society, I hate to use that term, but anyway, for the sake of convenience, I'll use it, is what determines the rest of their support. So the support comes from the bottom and then moves upwards. For the BJP, if they lose the faith of the middle classes, they are not able to translate anything else. They have to percolate downwards. So for each political party, the core constituency is different. And that's the importance of the middle class as far as the BJP is concerned. Now, a BJP guy who does something anti-middle class will find it impossible to rule. Mr. Yashwant Sinha, in one of the few budgets he presented as finance minister, almost lost his job because it was perceived as anti-middle class. So I think the BJP as a political party is always very mindful that you have to cling on, you have to hold on to the middle class, because it's from the middle class that you move upwards and you move downwards.
Shantanu, last question here. Okay, Natasha, I'll give you.
Thank you for your talk. My question is that, do you think the stakes for this election have been so high, including for Modi and every other person, that they have the media has not done full justice in covering this election? Do you think there has been a biased coverage by the media? Like, it is supposed to be an overall watchdog, not taking sides.
Why don't you ask a direct question?
So is the media biased?
Yeah.
Okay.
Have they done justice to what they were supposed to be doing?
Well,
could I add, there's a perception that there's been a corporate takeover of the media, or much of the electronic media, and this is translating into a probably less than fair coverage.
Yeah. Well, the media was inimically hostile to Mr. Modi till about January. Till about, I would say, really October.
No one asked that question then.
You've served in Ahmedabad. You know what the English language media in Ahmedabad was all about. I remember in elections we were told, empty streets greet Modi. When I'd just been to a packed meeting. So there's always been, but I think after the Rewari rally on September 15th, 2013.
Ex-serviceman rally.
Well, it was meant to be an ex-serviceman rally, but it was actually a rally of everybody. Yeah, that was 2 days after he was declared the prime ministerial candidate. Because Modi's speech got viewerships in India, what we call TRPs. So every channel, for very commercial reasons, moved on to covering Modi exhaustively. A recent media analysis has suggested that Modi got 34% of the TV time. I think they did about 8 or 9. You can't do every channel. And that was followed by Kejriwal, who got 15% of the time. Now, if you look at, and Rahul Gandhi got about 10. Now, if you look at the potential of Mr. Kejriwal, who, if they're lucky, will win about 10 seats. If they're very lucky, they'll win 10 seats. And see the manner in which he uses media as a force multiplier. Mr. Kejriwal will not do anything. And the generosity which has been accorded to Mr. Kejriwal is suddenly out of proportion to his clout. Yes, there has been a certain fascination with Modi, and that's partly got to do with the fact that Indians love winners. And it's also got to do with the fact there are a lot of people who perceive somehow that backing the right horse is good for their own self-interest. I'll be very honest with you.
Natasha?
Swapan, you talked about foreign policies. I just wanted to understand, what is your understanding of Modi's India in terms of relationship with Pakistan and China? Especially, would it be more commercial diplomacy, or would we see something else?
I think there are certain red lines which are going to be drawn as far as China is concerned. That for the past 5 years, we've had our China policy at least being conducted by people who believe that the pronunciation of their Mandarin is more important than India's interests. I think that will change. Mr. Modi is quite favorable to China. China accorded him the most generous red carpet treatment when he went there, I think, a year and a half ago. I mean, almost like a state visit. I think there is a scope for expanding a lot of commercial relationship with China. But on this question of Arunachal, he'll be a little more unbudging. And whether the Chinese pick up their cue, because I think there is no such thing as a fixed, rigid doctrine as far as China is concerned, as far as their India policy is concerned. They blow with the wind. If they detect an opportunity, they go for it. If they see that it's not. But I personally believe that the image of someone who has drawn red lines will do it no harm. As far as Pakistan is concerned, one of the most worrying things is the belief, and this is our sleuth friends have been very good at propagating this belief through the Bush Telegraph, is that Pakistan may actually want to test the efficacy of a new Indian leadership sooner rather than later through some form of action. I hope it's untrue. But I think if such a thing happens, we cannot see an improvement in relationship. The belief is also there that really Pakistan is caught in a much more profound existential crisis about what they are and what they aren't and how they're going to develop, etc. And till they actually come to terms with themselves, you can have a patchwork solution, but you cannot work towards anything a little more enduring. So, I think rather than be guided through a doctrine, I think it will be more sort of immediate concerns which might dictate it. For the moment, as I keep on saying, I think this emphasis will be on India's capacity building, and capacity building in every department.
On that note, Swapan, it's my great pleasure to thank you for that fantastic insight into Modi's Welt and Shong, as well as for coming here, this long distance. There was this small window that you had, and thank you so much for using that window to enlighten us about Modi's India. I don't know whether that's reassured Ian Woolford and his Indianness sufficiently, but it certainly be something which I think we'll have much to discuss about and introspect. But again, I don't think we could have got someone better than you to come here to speak on this topic. May I thank you once again on behalf of the Australia India Institute, University of Melbourne, all our partners. I want to thank the chair of the Institute for his presence here, the Counsel General for kindly coming for this talk and being supportive of the Institute, to all the others who are here this evening. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much.